Last night at the top of the show, we addressed the removal of Civil War monuments from public places around the country. We made the point that the sudden outrage over Confederate icons isn't entirely about slavery, horrifying as slavery is. It's also part of a larger effort on the left to discredit the founders of this country and the beliefs they enshrined in law. Once you believe that any figure in history who once owned slaves is inherently illegitimate and should be erased, it's hard to take our founding documents very seriously. How can you accept a Bill of Rights when it was written by slave owners? Well, you can't, which is why so many on the left don't and ignore the First and Second Amendments, among many others. That was the point we were trying to make. You may disagree with it, but it didn't seem crazy or mean-spirited. Here's the tweet that Bill Kristol, the former Weekly Standard editor and Fox contributor, sent minutes later, referring to our segment last night. Quote, "They started by rationalizing Trump. They ended by rationalizing slavery." Rationalizing slavery. That is not even close to what we were saying by any interpretation. What an outrageous thing to say, but it got worse. Just minutes later, Kristol suggested somehow we were anti-Semitic, too. Here's his second tweet, quote, "Next, Luther, Voltaire, and Marx were anti-Jewish, so why is it a big deal that the marchers were chanting, 'Jews will not replace us,' end quote." Okay, that is libel, but it's also really stupid. And yet Bill Kristol isn't stupid. I know that because I worked for Bill Kristol for more than 5 years in the 1990s. I knew him well. He was a genuinely smart guy. He was a good boss, too. He was humane and fair-minded. He was the kind of person I never would have imagined would write something that nasty and dishonest about an enemy, much less an old friend. What happened? Well, Kristol refused to explain himself today, so we can only guess at that. Part of the explanation has to be the moment that we're living in right now, where hysteria has supplanted rational debate, where the purpose of political argument is no longer to explain your beliefs, but to highlight what a morally upstanding person you are, what a virtuous guy you are, usually by contrast with your opponent, who is, by definition, evil. It's childish, obviously, but for many people, it's pretty tempting. Even 64-year-old men with Harvard degrees fall for it, apparently. But part of the problem is also the medium. 20 years ago, when Bill Kristol had something to say, he had a magazine to say it in. He talked through ideas with his friends, then he spent hours writing a piece that expressed those ideas precisely. There was thinking involved in the process. Now he just goes on Twitter, and he stays on Twitter all day, every day, dashing off little thoughts and impressions, scoring tiny little points against strangers in cyberspace, keeping obsessive track of his likes and retweets. At an age when he could be playing with his grandchildren, Kristol is glued to social media like a slot machine junkie in Reno. And after a while, of course, that distorts you. When you disagree with someone, it doesn't occur to you to pick up the phone and hash it out. You tweet it, hoping for retweets. It's depressing as hell. Kristol isn't the only one who does this, obviously. Washington is littered with formerly impressive people who now just shout and preen on social media. But I hate to see it with him. I liked Bill Kristol once, and I thought he liked me. What a shame. Well, after the weekend violence in Charlottesville, several cities have decided that they, too, are going to take down their monuments to the Civil War. Baltimore hastily carried away 4 Confederate monuments Wednesday morning. Lexington, Kentucky is hoping to do the same. The Reverend Jacques DeGraff is a Fox News contributor. He's a social justice champion, he says. And he supports removing all Confederate monuments. The Reverend DeGraff joins us now. Jacques, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker.
So let me just say at the outset that I'm kind of sympathetic to your point of view. I mean, I wouldn't want to see something that offended me every day. There was an Al Sharpton monument on my street, you know, a Marion Barry monument. I wouldn't like it. So I don't, you know, if you're offended by these monuments, I totally get that. But here's my question.
It's not that I'm offended. It's an offense to the United States of America to honor war criminals, to honor those who were traitors.
So that's.
They're traitors to our country.
So that's the standard. I just want to know what the... Well, they certainly were traitors to our country. They started their own country. I mean, by definition, I'm
and human rights violators. So the combination is there's no country on the planet, no society that would honor those people with credentials like that.
Except ours, because it was a civil war. And I agree with your definition. I mean, they were traitors to America, but then they came back into America. They reintegrated into America. That was the point. The country broke. And then it came back, oh, absolutely, and thank God they did. But it was a civil war. It wasn't like we were invaded, and so it's a little bit more complicated than that. But here's my question. Does your view of this apply to all slaveholders or just Civil War figures?
it's not just Civil War figures, but Civil War Confederate heroes and leaders are not to be honored in any shape, manner, or form. It's a societal imperative. And the fact that we're coming to our senses with the statues and with the stars and bars, the American swastika, they all must fall. We thought we had resolved this in Charlotte a couple of years ago. It's still not resolved, and so we're moving expeditiously in every form and fashion to complete the task of eradicating these symbols of hatred and division. Now, the issue of slaveholders,
you've got to more. You've got to
say the issue of slaveholders.
Can I say one thing? Just so you know, let me just inform you one thing. And I'm not even arguing with you. I'm just saying one of the reasons this hasn't been resolved is because the public is not for doing this. Only a small minority, only about a quarter of people polled yesterday in the United States thought that these monuments should come down. Over 60% said they should remain as historical remnants of an earlier age. So, like, you need to get the public on board before you do this. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the height of the civil rights movement, there were a lot of people who said that you need to go slow, you need to take your time, and now the people who they were saying that to are American heroes. So sometimes heroes, just like the people at the Boston Tea Party, if you had polled Boston, there would have been people who said, why are you throwing our tea in the harbor? So sometimes people...
Well, because it wasn't a democracy then. Wait, hold on. It was not a democracy. Well, hold on. No. We had... No. So you've given up on the idea of representative government, of voting for things? No, I haven't given up on anything. You think that... I haven't given up on anything. It sounds like you have. What I'm saying is that I understand that some people who champion social justice get it before the main society gets it. Just as some people in the Republican Party were slow to get that their president is dysfunctional. Okay. Yeah. Let's get back to the question of slaveholders, though, because I think this is a meaningful one. I think you make a more defensible point on the Civil War question, but what bothers me about the idea that all slaveholders need to be erased from American history is
I think the issue is not being erased from history. It's being not celebrated. If you put your name on a building, you're being celebrated.
Washington. Okay. Well, the city I live in is named after the founder of the country, the first president, whose plantation, which was populated by slaves, is right down the road at Mount Vernon. So, I mean, this is not a rhetorical question. That's a real question. Should we change the name of the capital of the country? What should we do about George Washington?
George Washington is not like a Confederate general. George Washington is the founder of a country and put his life on the risk, put his life on the line in order to do so. He was a flawed human being, but he created a great thing. He was part of a great creation that's self-perpetuating and self-correcting. That's what the process is about. Yeah. And so the fact is that right now, we can get to George Washington in Washington, D.C., but right now we need to take care of these Confederate statues. And these
let me just say, I don't want to get to Washington or Washington, D.C. I want to rewrite the history of this country. I liked where you left off the first time, which is to say he redeemed himself by his good deeds, which he did. Reverend, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oregon just passed a law to give free abortions to everybody, including illegal aliens, because that's not insane or anything. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood wants to teach your 5-year-old about transgenderism. Live Action founder Lila Rose will be here to discuss both. We're not making them up, by the way, so stay tuned.